Okay, well, we've got great to see 33 people joining us today. Welcome, everyone. My name's Sue McKerricker. I'm the CEO at the Australian Library and Information Association. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting here on the land of Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and we'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future. And I know everyone's has their own traditional owners of the land that you're all on, and we pay our respects to them as well. Today I'm joined by Liz Jack, who's head of Libraries Tasmania, and Liz has very kindly agreed to join us in the ALIA office to talk about media literacy, and also Trish Hepworth, the ALIA Director of Policy and Education. And the three of us have been together today at the National Film and Sound Archive, where we've been talking about media literacy with researchers, with government officials, and with other not-for-profit organisations who are very concerned in this space. So it seemed like a good idea, having spent that time with all these people talking about media literacy, to share that with ALIA folk. So what we'd like to do is really, as I say, talk about media literacy. And this is something which, talking to library people, some find it quite challenging. You think, oh, it's actually a whole new area that we have to become involved with. But actually, media literacy is essentially what we've been doing for years in libraries. And it's a kind of coming together of digital literacy, information literacy, cyber safety, all those things that libraries do so well. So rather than being concerned that this is an added weight of programming that we're going to need to accommodate, actually it's something that we're already doing, but it's just a different way of framing it. And it's a way of framing it that we've found has real resonance with government. And I think that stems from the obviously the experience in the States with misinformation around the whole election over there, also from COVID and the misinformation that's been going out about the COVID pandemic, but also about the vaccines. So this has become a very key issue for governments, for civil society, and for us working in libraries. So today what we wanted to share with you was Liz is going to speak first and is going to talk about her own experience with through the National and State Libraries and through Libraries Tasmania of what media literacy means for those libraries. And then Trish is going to share with you what we found out at this conference today. And then there'll be time for about 20 minutes or half an hour of Q&A at the end of that. So welcome everyone, and I'd like to hand over to Liz Jack from Libraries Tasmania.
Thanks, Sue. And as Sue said, also a member of National and State Libraries Australia, and in that role I represent NASLA on the Australian Media Literacy Alliance, which is probably worth mentioning because the Australian Media Literacy Alliance, or AMLA, whatever you want to call it, it has only been formed for not even 2 years. It's a group of like-minded organisations that are all working to build the understanding of media literacy in Australia and also what we need to do to address some of the issues related to it. And the organisations are quite broad and varied, and that showed today at the session we went to. So we have, and I've got them listed so I don't forget them, but of course ALIA is a key founder member. National and State Libraries Australia, NASLA. We have ABC Education. We have a couple of research universities, so Queensland University of Technology, Western Sydney University, the Museum of Australian Democracy, another founder member, and National Film and Sound Archives. And NFSA, and that's where they hosted, the research symposium was hosted. And one of the primary goals of AMLA is to work together with government to develop a national media literacy strategy, because we know that this is something that has become more and more a topic of conversation and concern for governments and other entities, not just in Australia, but right around the world. And to do that work and to develop if you want to call it a nationally endorsed strategy, we're looking at things like advocacy. So it's not just about, and research, but it's not just about the research. We have to get the word out there. We have to make sure that we're advocating for what we need. And we want to be able to provide some direction and guidance for educators, but also those working in the space of lifelong learning and building people's skills around information and media literacy, and generally raising awareness around the country. So what impresses me with AMLA is that we've only been involved and together working for, I'm guessing 18 months. I was going to look it up, Sue, but I've forgotten. And already we have built a website, and I have to say the website is in development. But on that website, you will find resources. And I know that in the chat, Sue's already put a link to the media literacy framework. We've developed that framework as an entity, and that framework provides some guidance on what is media literacy, what are we trying to achieve through media literacy, and what are some of the things we might look for if someone is media literate. There are posters, and there's a longer PDF document. And as of tomorrow, when the new research that we were privileged to be at the pre-launch for today is launched officially tomorrow, it will go up on that website. So I can highly recommend taking a look. So in terms of Libraries Tasmania's work, and I have to say that it's, well, Sue said media literacy, we're all worried that this is new thing, but really it's what we do, it's our bread and butter, and it links to so many other factors around just literacy and numeracy, digital literacy, information literacy. So I think for us at Libraries Tasmania, but also in the library sector, we already have an underpinning ethos that says all people should have free access to information and the public expression of ideas, knowledge and creative thought, and they also should have the right to express their views publicly. They should have a right to information, but they should have a right to accessing the right information. And I guess for me, that's what's important about media literacy, is that we need to make sure that those people that come through our doors, our members, clients, visitors, are getting access to the right information and also being given guidance on how to use it and how to convey that information. We already offer opportunities and support to do that. Look at all the programs we run through our libraries already. And I reflected when I was making a few notes for this, that if we go back to 2019, Library and Information Week theme, it was truth, integrity and knowledge. And that truly supports what sits for me behind the whole idea of building media literacy. And we know information these days comes in so many different forms. It's not just media as we know it, picking up a newspaper or watching the news. There's social media. We talked today about entertainment media and how many people use modes of entertainment, digital entertainment, to get their news and to inform themselves. So are they critically thinking about what they're seeing or hearing or reading or watching and questioning it and checking the sources, as we know they should and as we should all should. And it's our role to help people develop that understanding and those skills. And how do we do that? How do we do that in our own sector? And I think one of the things for me is that we need to keep the conversation going and we need to challenge each other. Certainly at Libraries Tasmania this year through Library and Information Week, we'll be talking more about this and looking at what resources are available. There's been so much work done already by the Finns, the Netherlands. There's a lot of research coming out of the UK, and there's been work done in the United States, as well as what we have here in Australia. So there is no scarcity of information. It's not about it being brand new, but it's about informing ourselves and staying up to date, because I think it's really important as library and information professionals, whether we train librarians or not, and I'm not, it's up to us to inform ourselves. If we're not informing ourselves and staying abreast of current trends and understanding what is out there, then we're not able to then provide the support and the services to the community that we're expected to do and that we all want to do. And COVID is a classic example of how in the library and information sector, we did stay up to date with the trends. We did make changes. We did show our innovative side and our flexibility with things like click and collect services or putting more things online, running programs virtually. We do that without even thinking about it. This should be no different. So for me, it's about that the continuing discussion and challenging ourselves and each other and asking some of the hard questions. I get quite passionate about this and could go on, but after having been at the symposium today with these two guys, I know how much Trish is going to have to try and cover to talk to you about what was at the symposium. There was just so much information. And I'm going to say one of the best things for me at the whole symposium was one of the speakers talked about the difference between bullshit and lies. And for me, it was a classic, and I think that says it all. You know,
I think you have to explain that.
Okay, so and you guys can help me, but bullshit is when someone. No, I'm going to go back. I liked what you said when you spoke. So lies are. There's more integrity in lies than there is in bullshit, because bullshit, you're just throwing it out there and you don't really care, and you don't really care what your message is or what someone takes away. Lies, you're actually carefully crafting the message to give someone some kind of misinformation for a purpose.
Yeah. So what they were saying really was that if you're a liar, then you actually care about the truth because you're going against it. Whereas if you're a bullshitter, you don't care whether it's true or false, so long as people do what you've said. And
I think we could think to the US election and know where that some of that said.
Absolutely. I'd just like to pick up on something there actually, Liz, which was that the conversation today, the people in the room, there were a lot of journalists, people who came from journalism, and there were a few of us who came from the library world. And there was a question about trust. And we always say that librarians are one of the most trusted professions. And it came across quite strongly. And there was a question about why is that the case when journalists have always, have integrity as well, or try to have. And we agreed that it was because actually we haven't been asked to monetize what we do. So in terms of helping people find their truth from our collections, there's no vested interest for us. We're not worried about how many clicks we're going to get as a result. We're not worried about our positions or our jobs because of that. So actually, we don't have the same issues as journalists, and journalists have seen their trust diminish substantially in society, whereas librarians have retained their trust. And what I particularly liked, Liz has just talked about public libraries. What I particularly liked was that it gave us the opportunity today to talk about the role of special libraries in media literacy. And we were able to highlight that during the COVID pandemic, health libraries sort of grouped together to get on top of the technology and harness the technology to do live search streams. And we were very proud of the work that Health Libraries Australia did through publicising those live streams, so that people were actually accessing, health practitioners were accessing the very latest authentic research on the COVID pandemic, the virus itself and the vaccines. So I was very proud of our health libraries in that situation.
And that makes me think of one other thing before we move to Trish. Sorry, Trish.
They're just taking my entire speech, so I'm just going to let them go.
But Sue, one of the things that I think and I agree entirely about the difference between journalists and librarians and where the level of trust is. But another difference for me is that most journalists are not making personal connections with people. They're out there getting mass messages out to people who sit behind firewalls, behind screens, behind newspapers, whatever it might be. Our librarians and the staff in our libraries, whether they're library services coordinators or whatever we're calling them, you guys are there face to face, making personal connections with every single people you come into contact with. You're on the ground making a difference and establishing relationships. So it's not only the people coming in our door that care about it, it's you that cares about it. And I think that lends itself to building trust because it's an interaction between two people.
So I think sorry, Trish, and then we will pass to you.
No,
so
it's all good.
I think what we're saying really is media literacy is already within a librarian's DNA. You already have the skills and the training to be able to do this. How you package it, how you describe it might need a bit of work. So programs that you've been running that you've been calling something else, you might want to rename as media literacy training for organisations if you're in a special library, or for the public if you're in a public library, or for students in a school library. But we're already there. This is just about really the dressing around it, because we have the trust, we have the ability, and it's what we do. And on that note, I will pass to Trish.
I'm a little bit sad actually. I was pretty much working on the grounds that if you two had talked for any longer, I didn't have to say anything, and that was sitting me fine. If I had to very quickly sum up what the messages that we got today out of the symposium were, you would say media literacy is critically important. People don't know what to do, and the older you get, the more remote you live. If you live in a lower socioeconomic group, if you have a disability, any level of disadvantage decreases your ability to know on aggregate. So it is critically important that we do something. And I think everybody is very much in agreement on that, which is often where we get to. Chiefly, we got to a second bit of an agreement, which says what we really need is a coordinated, consensus-based, evidence-based media literacy program that rolls out. And importantly, while we need to keep a focus on school kids and sort of equipping that younger generation with the tools that they're going to need, the biggest area of need that we've got is actually in those older generations. And one of the best points of contact that we've got with those is the library service. And so that, I think, in a very nutshell, would be where we are. We've got a big problem. We need to do something. Libraries are particularly well placed to do something, but we need to do it in coordinated fashion with our other mates, most likely through AMLA, because there is a fantastic coordination group, and using the evidence-based resources, which we've actually got an excellent basis for, having seen what failed in other countries. So the symposium went across a number of different speeches. So we had a keynote speaker from the US who brought in very much the US perspective, and obviously with COVID and Trump, they are very across mis and disinformation. We had a couple of panels, including the best presentation of the day from Sue, where we got to show all of the brilliant things that libraries did, which was excellent. And the big cornerstone of the afternoon was the release of the national report. Now, the report is not yet public, so this is your sneak peek of what is going to be public tomorrow. So I hope you're all just as excited as I am. For the report, what we did was, what happened was, it was the biggest and in fact the first ever survey of adult media literacy in Australia. So we've never actually asked the question before, so we had no idea what was going to happen. They surveyed about 3,500 people. They boosted the groups for CALD, so communities with a language other than English, and also for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, so that we had a statistically significant representation from those groups. And what did we find? Well, we found that only 39% of Australians are confident they can recognise mis and disinformation. But probably even less than that, because most people don't actually know what mis and disinformation are when you stick them against a wall. Despite that, 74% of people say that it needs to be addressed. So people agree that it's important, even if they're not quite sure what it is.
So I'm just going to leap in at this point and say that these figures are embargoed until tomorrow.
Sneak peek means please don't tweet this.
Yeah, so it's embargoed till tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Or share it in any other way.
That's right. Don't tweet it. Don't put it under the table. And so we've got something that says really big problem. People don't actually know what it is. There were a number of other things that we looked at. And so we found, and this will come as no surprise to people who work in libraries, who do anything around digital literacy or information literacy, we found that less than half of people managed to know things like how to change their privacy settings. People didn't know how to understand privacy terms and conditions. They weren't confident on their ability to understand mis and disinformation. They weren't even sure about whether they could identify online harassment, and they were absolutely not sure what they would do if they were being harassed. So across a whole spectrum, people are not confident. And as I said, that confidence and that ability to do it increase with every bit of disadvantage you know. So if you are highly educated, living in a metro area from an English-speaking background, you probably use several social media sources and you are much more confident on your abilities to deal with things that come your way. The older you get, the more remote you get. If you live with a disability, if you speak a language other than English at home, if you come from a lower socioeconomic background, your confidence evaporates. Now, for people who work, especially within the public library sector, I would say that gives you an idea of the real key areas of demand that we sit there.
But Trish, can I just jump in? Because I would imagine that for those people who are in the public library sector listening right now, there'd be many of you saying, we already knew that.
Yeah.
Because I think some of this is stuff that we've been working with. And we've talked about digital literacy before, and how many times do we, in delivering digital literacy courses and programs, we're already talking to people about, you know, managing their privacy online, dealing with harassment, where they go, what they do. So we're already ahead before we even start.
Absolutely. And I think that is just that thing to... It's nice when the paper comes out and it says, oh, look, the things that you already know, they're actually things.
And here's some new stuff too.
Exactly. Couple of quick other themes that came out of the presentations, especially from our international keynote looking at overseas. It's important to note that mis and disinformation are not a new phenomenon. Like, it's not like we've suddenly entered an era where truth has become more slippery. And I would like to pay tribute to Sue, who started off with a slide with Ern Malley, which I thought was an excellent tip of the hat to where we have come from. But one of the things that has changed is the intermediation of news and the different sources of the way that things are moved. And so our first keynote in particular spoke about two things around spectacle and around distrust. So when we're talking about spectacle, we are talking about the incentives that give people something that is clicks over content, the incentives about trying to keep attention for as long as possible rather than for doing good. And I think that very much picks up on what Sue was saying before about the fact that because libraries are not looking to monetize their users' engagement or monetize their users' clicks, that gives us that altruistic basis that really underpins the work that we're doing. We are the good faith actor in all of this that actually wants to help, not because we're being paid. Although, you know, getting a salary at the end of the day is always a useful thing. There's also a big issue around distrust, and Sue's already touched on this, so I won't say much more about it, except to say that it is interesting, I think, to look at the role of libraries as intermediaries for information. Libraries don't produce information. We're not the journalists writing the copy. We're not the media groups that are letting out the programs or writing the books. What we are the gateway and the place where people can come to find those information. And if you ask people who you would trust your local library against Twitter or TikTok or Facebook, that gives you an idea of just the polar opposite trust ecosystems that we are actually working in. We know that there are constraints around media literacy, so we can't match the pace of technological innovation. And if we are trying to hit each new service as it turns up, we will be playing a losing game of whack-a-mole and it won't get anywhere. We know that we can't do everything by placing responsibility onto the individual. So we can absolutely equip people with as many tools as possible, but there still needs to be attention paid to the ecosystem. And when we're equipping people with tools, it needs to not just be about critical thinking about the media and the sources, but also about the delivery and the way that things have been delivered to them to see. And we also know that media literacy, if it's not done well, can exacerbate inequalities, and we need to avoid that. So that's the things that are challenges. What do we need? As I said, we need a national evidence-based coordinated strategy. We need to make sure that we increase values, and we need to make sure that when we are looking at media literacy and information literacy, that we have a values-informed framework. And I think that's some work that Amla's also been incorporating that's been really fantastic. We need to have something that's fun. One of the things that came up today is that if we don't have a sense of fun about things, nobody's going to pay attention. And news often is not fun, whereas fake news is often incredibly fun. And we do need to think about that. Falling sort of alongside that as well, I think it's important to look at how people approach news and what they see as news. So one of the interesting things that we spoke about today was when we think about media literacy, we often think about news. But if you ask people, over half of the people said that they actually rely on media, so entertainment media, to give them information about the world in which they are. And when you broke it down too, so called communities in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, for example, were more concerned about racial stereotypes and dangerous racial stereotypes in things like entertainment media. So that perspective of critically consuming not just news media, but entertainment media is really important. And people's mindsets sometimes are not as attuned to the critical consumption depending on how you come to it. And picking up from that, one of the key things that I'm sort of going to close in when we're talking about how libraries fall into this is that when people come into libraries, as we discussed today, people come in with a curious mind. They are coming because they're already looking for something, and they are looking for help, they are looking for assistance, they're open to seeing things. And it is that mindset that means that support that we can give them at that point, or training or programs at that point, are much more likely to bear fruit than putting out something that is a campaign on Twitter where everybody's already in a bad mood and distrusting everything they're reading. So I think those sort of elements of context really came through today as something really critical while we're doing it. Closing off very quickly, ALIA is doing two very important things in this space that I am going to give a blatant plug to. So coming out in ALIA Weekly tomorrow, there will be a call for expressions of interest for a project, a research project that we're doing on mis and disinformation in library collections. So this is because we know that it's come up increasingly over the last sort of 12 months or so, issues around what do you do if you have, say, materials in your library that promote vaccine conspiracy theories, or potentially have really harmful racial stereotypes within them. What do we do around both the collection development and the collection management of those, because we are aware that it's an area that is developing and we need some more fundamental Australian-based research. So we are really looking forward to what that project will find. And if you happen to be an academic researcher on this call, please put in your expression of interest for that one. And then the second thing I'm going to blatantly plug is we have a media literacy course coming up. It is open for registrations right now. Registrations will close on the 8th of June, which I know seems a long way off, but we will also cap places. So it's absolutely in your interest to get in sooner rather than later. And that will be running from mid-June onwards. It is a brand new course, and I have been assured that it's going to be fundamentally useful. So please do check that one out. And Sue has just dumped the link to that into the chat. So you've got no excuse for not going and checking it out.
Thank you, Trish, and thank you, Liz. So what we've got now is in the chat, thank you to everyone who's been putting their comments. In the chat, you will find a link to the Australian Media Literacy Alliance website, which Liz mentioned, and also the Twitter link, because that's a good place to find out what's going on. You'll also find, as Trish has said, the link to our training course, which would be really great. And also I've put in the ABC Education site, because if you want to see fun media literacy stuff, admittedly targeting teenagers rather than adults, that's a really good place to have a look at. But what I'd like to do now is go to the questions and pose those to Liz and Trish. What would be great is, as I go to your question, if you wanted to actually voice it yourself, unmute yourself and show us your video and put the question direct, that would be wonderful. So we've got one, the first one was from an unknown about how do we best work with people who do not trust trustworthy sources. So would the unknown like to make themselves known? I'm going to give a second for the whole techie thing of trying to unmute yourself. No? Okay, well, let's just tackle the question anyway. So, Liz, how do we best work with people who do not trust trustworthy sources?
That's a really difficult one, Sue, and it even came up today. You know, we did, a couple of people grappled with it. It really depends why they don't trust the trustworthy sources, I think. It's a hard question to answer without the specifics, because if you're, as I said before, we're really fortunate. We're not journalists dealing with masses of people behind screens. We do have that one-on-one connection. So sometimes it's about building trust in other ways. And if we can build trust in us as individuals, then it's easier to explain potentially why a source is trustworthy. The other thing that we did discuss today too was that sometimes it's the way the information is conveyed. It's not, you can't say, trust me, I'm a librarian, or trust me, I know, trust me, I'm a doctor. There has to be some rationale and some explanation behind the information. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I don't think there's an easy answer. I'd love to know what you guys think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's worth thinking too about the different things about mis and disinformation. So you have disinformation that is actually basically deliberately promulgated to change. Basically, it's lying, let's face it, or bullshitting, probably more accurately. And then you've got misinformation, and the work that you've done on misinformation, which is material that is factually inaccurate, and it can do a lot of damage, but it's generally shared and promulgated by people who believe it themselves, and working out why it is that they believe it. And it's very easy to often write those people off as you know, having ulterior or nefarious motives, but often you find that the reason they're doing it comes from a place of care. And we see that a lot with vaccines and misinformation around vaccines. And the place that people often come from and the motivations are around health and around caring for family. And so some of the best work you've got around unpicking that is actually to go back to the motivations and then try and rebuild a pathway out of it. But that is quite a complex task.
It also links to values. You know, sometimes if something does not speak to your own personal values, it wouldn't matter what anybody told you, you're not going to necessarily believe it.
Absolutely.
Type.
Yeah. Lisa, thank you for that lovely comment about I could listen to this conversation all day, so valuable, and the passion is palpable. We really do care about this stuff. Lisa, do you have any comments you want to make?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I attend a lot of deaf talks, so a lot of meetups with the deaf community. And what's brought up a lot is that often they aren't even given captions to receive that information, but they do make a point to say they prefer Auslan, given that a majority of deaf Australians, they leave high school with the literacy of like a 3rd year level, as well as because they often don't get that direct access from trustworthy sources. All they can do is they get very filtered information, and it's very hearsay a lot of the time. So I was wondering if we address the deaf community in the symposium today.
So it wasn't specifically addressed, but Trish can possibly comment on the marginalised, you know, the different audiences and groups, because I think people with disability as well.
People with a disability very much do, and they have. They were one of the groups that was identified as being as having the lowest levels of media literacy. They have the lowest usage of different media sources, and a lot of that is accessibility barriers. We also had a good conversation about the way that baseline literacy ties into media literacy. And in fact, Sue can probably talk about the various layers of literacy much better than I can. But if you take sort of that ability to have functional literacy in spoken and verbal things, and written and non-written and Auslan, like as a basic level of literacy, the more of those you're cut out of, or the more you're not proficient in those, it flows on to everything else. And for media literacy, there are particular barriers, obviously, for people who are hearing impaired, people who are visually impaired, because we are still, and I'm so very conscious as we are talking that we have not captioned this seminar, like just
No, actually, we have somebody doing a simultaneous thingy. So
oh, good,
I
excellent.
hope that's working.
Phew. We just know that there are multiple barriers, and often there are barriers even within the help-seeking places. So almost every year we pull up some of the report. I know when Facebook recently tweaked some of their reporting things, it actually tweaked it in such a way that it was really difficult for the visually impaired community to then engage with the reporting mechanisms. So you've got issues around just the general literacy rolling on to digital literacy. You've got areas about groups that potentially are siloed because they don't have as much access to the mainstream because it's not being made accessible to them, ending up in echo chambers. And then you've got huge issues around the mechanisms that we might take for granted to go and seek help or to report issues not being as accessible to people in those communities as well. So what I'm basically saying, yes, it's a huge problem. What do we do about it? I think one of the key things is that we've got to be mindful in any design strategy, and we'd be looking very much at sort of a co-design process, if possible, that members from all of those communities have to be part of that design process so that we embed it from the very foundation all through to the implementation.
I've just stolen Sue's pen, Lisa. I think you've raised a really good question, and you might be interested to know that one of the things that the researchers themselves were saying today was they've put out this first report, but they're now going back down into some of the written, the longhand responses and some of the other qualitative information, and there may well be something in there that comes from members of the deaf community or the visually impaired groups. So we can always follow up and try and get a little bit more information, because I do think it's a really good point that you've raised.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm going to move on because I've got a few coming through. So Ruth Cameron. Ruth, you put something in there a while ago about could a coordinated effort address media literacy, spearhead the push for universal digital literacies. Ruth, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I helped to create a students' digital capabilities framework. I work in an academic library, and I'm just wondering, because that project finished at the end of 2019, and of course things slowed down with COVID, etc. But trying to get interest from across the university and show how important digital literacies are. I'm just wondering, media literacy is, so obviously important and so obviously critical, especially for graduates, but for lifelong learning, it's important for everybody. Could that be a way to grab staff attention and say, look, this actually is really important?
Ruth, I think you've absolutely nailed it. The conversation was actually more about schools and about staff in schools. I might be misrepresenting that actually, but then there was a discussion also about how at the academic level, it was kind of cross-curricular. I'm passing to one of the others because you probably heard it better than I did.
I think you've nailed it. It was a wide-ranging conversation, and let's face it, the research that has come out is based on interviews with or surveying adults, and that was from 18, so that would capture university students. But we had a range of educators in the room, some of whom were probably educators of primary school students and some who were older. I think we're only just scratching the surface, and I think that the points that you've raised, Ruth, are again really valid points, and I think we should be taking it back to ANLA and making sure it's captured somewhere. We are looking for a coordinated, spearheaded approach. What it looks like and whether it's under the guise of universal digital literacy or media literacy or whatever we call it, I think is yet to be determined.
Well, I actually think calling it media literacy is really inspired, Ruth. And it reminds me, this is so random, it reminds me of once I was talking to a school library and they really wanted to get the teachers to love the library. So what they did was they bought a coffee machine. And they put this really decent coffee machine into the school library, and suddenly the teachers were coming in and loving the library and finding out all about the other things they did. And I think, Ruth, you've got this media literacy label, which you can put onto the digital literacy stuff you're already doing. It'll make it look new, exciting, the stuff they should be looking at. And I think you can use that to lure people through. So I think you're on a winner there.
Great. Okay, I just have to convince everyone else now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Stephen, I saw you flash up for a second because you're up next.
Yes, indeed. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, so my question was basically, I was looking at some of the stuff that Alia was doing with the Senate in terms of media literacy. And in the comments section, there was this fellow who was essentially saying that media literacy was, or teaching media literacy was a form of censorship, and that libraries were attempting to censor these kind of like fringe voices, kind of like the COVID controversial ministers such as Craig Kelly. So how do we, when we get that kind of pushback in terms of media literacy and what we want to get out there, what's the best way to address that, especially considering that if we run these media literacy classes, how do we respond to people who come into those classes and can essentially say, well, this is censorship, it's not conducive to an open democracy if we're trying to potentially silence these voices?
Stephen, thank you. That plays exactly into Trish's research.
Yeah, so firstly, you should ask me in 6 months when I have a much better answer for you. And did I mention that you should share that research opportunity wide and sort of fair and wide? I think it's actually really important to look at what media literacy does and doesn't do. So what media literacy, especially from a library and an empowering perspective, is it works with people on skills. What it doesn't do is like take down and pull all the books out of the library and only sort of give these are our official tomes that have been cleared by the Australian government and this is what we will do. And that's very much what libraries would never do. But one of the things that says, okay, well, we want an open and we want a very free society. We want free access to information. But what do we need that supports that to make sure that it's enriching for the community, not dangerous? And one of the things that we need to do around that is education. Yeah. And so to me, I think media literacy is actually almost the polar opposite of a way that you would deal with mis and disinformation and censorship.
Stephen, it's a really good question because it's something that has all sorts of aspects to it. And we've talked today about a case in Adelaide where the public library was actually, this was about a week ago, and it was in the Adelaide Advertiser, that the library was asked by council to take out, I think it was New Idea, Women's Day, and a couple of other magazines because they were toxic and did not tell the truth. And the community came right back and said, that's censorship. We know it's rubbish, but we really enjoy reading it. So they're back on the shelves in Adelaide.
And the public are very media literate. They know that it's rubbish, but they still want to read it.
Yeah.
They still want to read it, yeah.
So look, Stephen, thanks for that comment. And flicking down the chat, I saw that Naomi had sort of joined you in that comment. Naomi, do you want to just add anything to that at all? So I'll just give Naomi a second to come online if she wants to add anything. No? Okay, that's fine. I won't go back to Lisa because I think we've sort of covered that. And I just want to say apologies to Jennifer from the ACT Assembly Library, who's fantastic. And if she wasn't on an iPad, would be terrific to ask a question, but never mind. Now we've got Jen. And you've referenced an article. Would you like to speak to that?
No, it was just a suggestion really, because it was something that I read that I found really interesting. And we've got this idea as librarians that if we put the right information in front of people, that will be enough. But this article sort of talked about how there are people, you know, they're effectively, if you present them with, you know, information that opposes their beliefs, it almost acts to reinforce it. Because I mean, we sort of saw that in America and Trump and this whole thing, everything is just fake news, fake news, fake news. So the article sort of talks about how you address those sorts of people who are actively resistant rather than just here's the right information. So it was just a suggestion for people to sort of read.
Anyone want to comment?
I wanted to ask Jen what the punchline was. Like, did they work out what works?
Well, it sort of talks about how so large scale action is really, really difficult. Like there's nothing that's going to make all climate change deniers just spontaneously change their minds. It sort of talks about how it's really kind of breaking down this mistrust and rebuilding that trust. And really the only way that sort of happens is kind of on an individual level. Like you sort of need to break down someone's resistance to this information and then make them kind of receptive to alternative things.
It was really interesting. One of the speakers today was from Fact Checker, AAP Fact Checker, and he was saying that, you know, they checked so many, usually it's social media, and particularly Facebook at the moment, but also Instagram, but of all the posts they check and where they think they can have the most impact on people is not those people who are just never going to believe them, and they have been almost conditioned to not accept that a fact is correct. They will continue to believe the mistruth, the disinformation, whatever we want to call it. Where they tend to find that they have the most success is where people are already starting to challenge or ask questions and show that glimmer of critical thinking and starting to ask the questions already. So I don't think, I'm not normally negative, but I don't think we're ever going to get everybody. But the more we can build the momentum, I think the more chance we'll have.
And I think that went back to what we were saying about people coming to libraries because they're curious, because they want to find stuff out. So we're getting them in the right mindset to actually be able to influence them. If you've got people who are at home in their apartment, stuck in their seat going, oh, I'm not having any of it, that's harder to do. So, yeah. Next question up was from Chloe, which was simply, where can we access the report tomorrow? I've put the Media Literacy Alliance email in website, sorry, at the head of the chat. It will be on the linked from that website tomorrow. And what we can also do is we can send it around to everybody on this call. So we might even drop you all a personal email tomorrow. Will, this is a very good question, actually, about libraries already doing a lot and having limited resources. So what other things? Do you want to put that to the group?
Hello, have you got me there?
We've got you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just on the previous question as well. I recall back in my undergraduate days doing studies in on media audiences, and the sort of general conclusion there was that people, and this is more in the traditional media context, but is that people have a pretty strong preferences to media channels and messages that you know, that reconfirm their sort of existing views, and to you know, aside from sort of agenda setting, which I guess is to draw attention to other resources, it is pretty hard to just, you know, persuade someone from a completely opposite point of view, sort of thing. But yeah, to my question, I guess what I was really wondering there, you know, what might have come out of the symposium today that identified what's really lacking in the current initiatives. You know, just given the sort of scale of the problem, and you know, is it just, you know, is there more resources on the table? Is there more funding for this sort of thing that the government might be interested in? Or
Well, I can absolutely assure you that we'd be trying to get money. But I would like to start, and then Liz can disagree with me, but I'd like to start by saying, actually, you know, with libraries, when we hear about something, we think, what new can we create to address this need to I would say, pull back a second. What you're already doing just needs to be a bit of relabeling, a bit of repackaging to fit with this new need, because actually it's what we're already doing. And I just think it's very easy for us to go, oh, we must invent something new, which will take resource, will take time, will take capacity we don't have. Actually, let's first look at what we've already got. But Liz, you might disagree. So
I don't disagree, but I'm going to add to that, because I think that's right. In terms of the library and information sector, there is a lot that we are doing already, and I think we need to be really proud of that. It doesn't mean we just sit back and do no more, but we look at ways we might do things differently or how we might repackage them. But if we're talking about a national strategy that is addressing what you could almost call as a wicked problem. You know, in Tasmania, we talk about literacy and numeracy, baseline literacy and numeracy. We had the discussion today, 48% of Tasmanians are not functionally literate to be able to do their normal living on a day-to-day basis, read a bus timetable, read the label on their prescription bottle, whatever it might be. So if we're talking about dealing with a problem like that, it's a global problem, but let's bring it back to national, then absolutely every player in the game and every stakeholder needs to stand up and be counted and contribute. And there are many of them that already are, and we haven't even acknowledged the Alana and Madeline Foundation. We haven't talked really a lot. So you've given the link to ABC Education, MOAD, the members of AMLA, some of the universities, all our special libraries and libraries. Let's take libraries out of it and just talk about the other players. There are a lot of individual entities and groups doing things, but what's missing is the coordination of that and the pulling of it together. And that's why having a national strategy to start with is something that I believe we really need to do. Yeah. And let's understand what we're already doing, where there's overlap that we can spread the resources further, and where are the gaps, and then what are we not doing? Because I don't know what that is, and I don't know that anybody really does.
And that sort of ties in, sorry, I'm just going to loop in. That ties in with the second thing, which is what's the timeline for developing the national strategy. We were very fortunate. Trish and I gave evidence to a Senate inquiry, and out of that inquiry came a recommendation that the government work with us on creating this national strategy for media literacy. There isn't a timeline as such, but the conversations we've had is with the department who are following up on it is that they want to move quickly on this one because it has the government of prioritising this as an area. So actually, I feel quite confident that if we were having this conversation same time next year, we would be in a different place. I'm also just going to flag that we've 4 minutes to go, and I don't want to keep everybody longer. So I'm just going to flick through the chat here.
I just wanted to say something really quickly then, which is when we're talking about the different stakeholders and the different dimensions, just want to remind everybody that this isn't just even about public libraries and doing face-to-face media training, media literacy training. When Sue says we've all been in this area for a long time, we've all been in this area for a long time. So when the Health Libraries of Australia put their rapid evidence stuff out, that is one piece of the puzzle. When the university libraries are working consistently on open access policies that mean that you've got peer-reviewed science and social science and everything out freely available, that's also a part of the media literacy strategy. So all of that entire library ecosystem already does this.
Beautifully put, Trish, I think. I can see that we've got a couple of other comments rather than questions, and thank you for all participating. Thanks, Rafaela, for the last beautiful comment. Thank you. So next year I want to include media literacy as part of my primary library digital literacy teaching role. Go for it. That is brilliant. And Lisa, thank you for that last comment as well. So look, we're at 5:57. I'm going to round it up now because I don't want to keep you beyond the 6 o'clock deadline. So just to recap, we went to a great thing today. We are so excited about this and we wanted to share it with you. The good news is that the report comes out tomorrow and we will send you an email link so that you can all access that. But in the meantime, please do go and have a look at the Australian Media Literacy Alliance website, have a look at the Twitter account, see what's being talked about in this area. It has been an absolute pleasure being here with Trish and with Liz, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And let's keep this conversation going. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.